Imagine waking up one morning with a strange, almost imperceptible sensation in your chest. Nothing dramatic, no panic, no tragedy, just a quiet weight, like something has been pressing against you for years, and only now are you beginning to notice it. You look at your life. From the outside, it seems functional, maybe even successful. You've learned how to behave, how to adapt, how to smile at the right moments. You've learned what earns approval and what invites rejection. You've learned how to survive, and yet something feels wrong, not broken, not shattered, hollow. You tell yourself the same story you've told for years. I just need more confidence. I need to love myself more. I need better self-esteem. But here's the uncomfortable question you've been avoiding. What if your idea of self-esteem is the very thing that's keeping you trapped? What if everything you've been taught about confidence, self-love, and worth is not incomplete, but fundamentally misleading? You live in a world obsessed with self-esteem. We measure it, we boost it, we market it, we sell it in books, courses, affirmations, mirrors, and morning routines. And yet anxiety is rising, depression is rising, emptiness is rising. If self-esteem was the cure, why does the sickness keep spreading? This is the contradiction no one wants to face. You've been told that low self-esteem is the problem. But what if the real danger isn't low self-esteem, but fragile self-esteem, a version of worth that depends on success, validation, productivity, attractiveness, morality, usefulness, a worth that must be constantly defended, maintained, performed, a worth that collapses the moment you fail. Ask yourself, honestly, without judgment, who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when you are not achieving? Who are you when you disappoint someone? Who are you when you are not enough? If your sense of value disappears in those moments, then what you have is not self-esteem, it's self-surveillance. From childhood, you learn something quietly, invisibly, without words. You learned that love was conditional, that acceptance had requirements, that being good, useful, or strong made you safer. And so you adapted. You became what worked, not consciously, instinctively. You learned to earn worth instead of inhabiting it. And now as an adult, you carry that same internal structure everywhere you go. A silent evaluator in your mind, constantly asking, am I enough now? Am I valuable now? Am I worthy yet? This is the unseen trap, the one no motivational quote can free you from. Because the more you chase self-esteem, the more you reinforce the belief that it must be earned. And that belief quietly turns your entire life into a performance. Think about it. Why does praise feel addictive? Why does criticism feel like annihilation? Why does failure feel personal, not situational? Why does rest feel like guilt? Why does being ordinary feel unbearable? Because somewhere deep inside, you are not trying to live. You are trying to justify your existence. This is the uncomfortable truth few are willing to say out loud. Modern self-esteem is not self-love. It is self-management, a constant attempt to control how you are seen, measured, ranked, and judged by others and eventually by yourself. And the cruel irony? The more you succeed at this, the further you drift from yourself. You become competent, admired, impressive, and internally disconnected. You don't feel authentic. You feel maintained. This is why so many people with high self-esteem feel secretly exhausted. Why confidence feels brittle. Why validation never lasts. Why every achievement immediately demands another. Because your worth is not rooted, it's conditional. And anything conditional can be taken away. So let me ask you something that may unsettle you. What if your problem is not that you don't value yourself enough, but that you have learned to value yourself in the wrong way? What if the voice telling you to believe in yourself is actually the same voice that says you must constantly prove yourself? What if self-esteem, as you've been taught to pursue it, is not the path to freedom, but the most sophisticated cage ever built? This is where the discomfort begins, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. You start to notice how often your decisions are driven by fear of being less admired, less respected, less lovable, less significant. You realize how much of your life is shaped not by desire, but by avoidance. Avoiding shame, avoiding rejection, avoiding insignificance. And slowly, painfully, you begin to sense the truth forming beneath the surface. You are not living from self-worth. You are living from self-protection. And that changes everything. Because if this is true, then fixing your self-esteem won't free you. It will only make the mask more convincing. The real question is no longer, how do I feel better about myself? It becomes, who would you be if you didn't need to feel superior, validated, or enough to exist? That question doesn't comfort, it destabilizes. And that's exactly where this journey begins. Once that question enters your mind, it doesn't ask politely. It lingers, it follows you into ordinary moments. When you check your phone, when you replay conversations, when you wonder if you said too much or not enough. It shows up when someone disagrees with you and something inside tightens. When silence feels like rejection, when approval feels like relief. You start to see how much emotional energy is spent not on living, but on monitoring yourself. Your tone, your posture, your opinions, your usefulness, your image. You don't just act, you watch yourself acting, and the watcher is never satisfied. Because the watcher learned early that safety comes from being acceptable. This is where the paradox sharpens. Self-esteem was supposed to liberate you. Instead, it turned you into your own overseer. A quiet internal authority that asks, endlessly, are we doing okay? Are we still worthy? Did we lose points just now? This is not confidence, this is conditional existence. You begin to notice something else. Something even more disturbing. The moments when your self-esteem feels highest are not the moments you feel most alive. They are the moments you feel most approved, after praise, after success, after being needed, after being chosen. And the crash that follows is inevitable. Because if your worth rises due to an external event, it must fall when that event fades. This is the hidden deal you made long ago, usually without realizing it. I will feel valuable when I perform correctly, and performance never ends. The world reinforces this beautifully. Be productive, be likable, be confident, be resilient, be inspiring, be healed, be evolving. Even your suffering must be meaningful now. And so you optimize yourself like a product. You curate strengths, you hide weakness, you polish identity, you brand your personality. Not because you are shallow, but because you learn that visibility without approval is dangerous. So you adapt. You become high functioning, and people admire you for it. But late at night, when nothing demands anything from you, there's a question you don't know how to answer. Who am I when I stop trying? This is where the fear creeps in, because stopping feels like disappearance. If you are not improving, achieving, pleasing, growing, what justifies your place? This is the psychological cost no one warns you about. Self-esteem that depends on performance quietly erodes your ability to rest, to fail, to be uncertain, to be ordinary. You don't just fear failure, you fear being nothing. And so even your inner life becomes transactional. I'll allow myself peace once I earn it. I'll accept myself once I fix myself. I'll feel worthy once I arrive. But arrive where? There is no finish line. Only moving standards. This is why the pursuit of self-esteem often feels like walking toward a horizon that never gets closer. And deep down, something in you already knows this. You've felt it after achieving something you chased for years. The brief high, followed by the strange emptiness. The silence that asks, is this it? You've felt it when external validation faded faster than expected. When applause turned into pressure. When being the strong one became a prison. So let's ask a more dangerous question. What if self-esteem isn't missing, but overvalued? What if tying your sense of worth to how you feel about yourself was never stable to begin with? Because feelings fluctuate, opinions change, circumstances collapse. If your value depends on an internal state, then you are always one bad day away from losing yourself. This is why shame has such power. Not because you did something wrong, but because shame whispers, you are wrong. And once worth becomes negotiable, everything becomes threatening. Feedback feels like judgment. Boundaries feel like rejection. Difference feels like danger. So you smooth yourself down. You make yourself easier to accept, less intense, less inconvenient, less real. And in doing so, you slowly disappear behind what works. Here's the cruel irony no one wants to admit. The version of you with high self-esteem is often the version that is most disconnected from truth, because truth risks disapproval, and disapproval feels like death when worth is conditional. So authenticity becomes dangerous, honesty becomes risky, stillness becomes terrifying. And you call this anxiety, but anxiety is only the symptom. The root is this: you are trying to secure your right to exist, and existence was never supposed to be earned. This is the moment where the story begins to shift, not into comfort, but into clarity.
Because once you see that self-esteem can become a mechanism of control, the question is no longer how to raise it. The question becomes, what would it mean to live without constantly evaluating your worth, not improving it, not repairing it, not proving it, but stepping outside the system entirely? That thought feels radical, almost irresponsible, and that's why it matters. Because the cage that feels safest is the one you decorate with affirmations. And freedom doesn't begin with feeling better about yourself. It begins when you stop asking whether you are enough at all. It's something you're maintaining, like a fragile structure that needs constant reinforcement, like a story that collapses the second you stop narrating it, and suddenly you understand why exhaustion feels so familiar. Because you are not tired from life. You are tired from holding yourself together, from constantly answering an unspoken question. How am I doing as a person right now? This question is never neutral. It carries judgment, comparison, fear, and worst of all, it assumes that your value is measurable. So you measure against others, against your past, against expectations you never consciously chose. You scroll and feel smaller. You succeed and feel temporary relief. You fail and feel exposed. Your inner world becomes a scoreboard, and the score never feels high enough. This is where something deeply unsettling emerges. You begin to notice that your self-esteem rises most when you are least yourself, when you suppress inconvenient emotions, when you perform competence instead of admitting confusion, when you smile instead of speaking, when you adapt instead of resisting. You are rewarded for self-abandonment and punished for authenticity. No one says this out loud, but your nervous system learns it perfectly, so it doesn't ask, "What do I feel?" It asks, "What is acceptable to feel?" It doesn't ask, "What do I want?" It asks, "What will keep me valued?" And slowly, quietly, identity begins to fracture. There is the self you present, and the self you manage, and the self you silence. Most people never notice when this split happens because it looks like maturity, like emotional intelligence, like being well-adjusted. But inside, something goes numb. You start losing access to raw desire, to instinct, to anger that protects, to sadness that reveals, because those states threaten approval, and approval feels like oxygen. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Self-esteem does not eliminate insecurity. It organizes it. It teaches insecurity how to behave. Instead of chaos, you get control. Instead of collapse, you get performance. Instead of despair, you get optimization. You don't break down, you burn out. And the world applauds you for it. Because a person chasing self-esteem is predictable. They work harder. They tolerate more. They blame themselves. They internalize failure. They adapt instead of questioning the system. They rarely rebel. This is why self-esteem is such a convenient ideal. It keeps the problem inside you. If you suffer, it's because you don't love yourself enough. If you struggle, it's because you haven't healed enough. If you feel empty, it's because you haven't done the inner work correctly. The structure remains untouched. Only you are questioned. And this is where the paradox becomes almost cruel. You are encouraged to look inward for worth, but punished whenever that inward truth disrupts the external order. So you learn to curate your inner world, too. You adopt the right insights, the healthy narratives, the evolved reactions. Even your self-acceptance becomes conditional. I accept myself, but only the healed version. I love myself, but not the messy parts. I'm worthy once I fix this flaw. And the flaw keeps moving, because it must. If you ever fully arrived, the system would lose its grip. This is why the pursuit of self-esteem often feels like chasing peace through effort. But peace cannot be earned, and effort implies deficiency. So the loop continues. What no one prepares you for is the existential weight of this realization. You may have spent years trying to feel worthy, when worth was never the question. The real question was obedience. Obedience to norms, to expectations, to roles that rewarded you with validation. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often you apologize for existing, how often you over-explain, how often you minimize yourself to remain acceptable. You notice how fear masquerades as humility, how compliance masquerades as kindness, how silence masquerades as peace. And suddenly, self-esteem starts to feel less like a solution and more like a distraction. Because the deeper discomfort isn't low self-esteem, it's the terror of existing without permission, of being unapproved, unvalidated, unmirrored, of standing in your own experience without asking the world if it's okay. This is where the great question finally sharpens into something unavoidable. What if the need for self-esteem is the symptom, not the cure? What if the constant effort to feel enough is what keeps you trapped? What if the moment you stop asking whether you are worthy is the moment life actually begins? This thought is destabilizing because it threatens everything you've been taught about growth, healing, and self-worth. And yet, it feels strangely relieving, like loosening a grip you didn't realize was causing pain. This is the edge, the place where the old framework can no longer hold, and beyond this edge lies something radically different, not self-esteem, but freedom. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the voice inside your head, the one that judges, corrects, motivates, and shames, was never truly yours. It was installed, piece by piece, praise by praise, correction by correction. A raised eyebrow when you were too much, silence when you were inconvenient, approval when you performed the right version of yourself. And slowly, without ceremony, you learned the rules. Be agreeable, be capable, be strong, but not threatening, confident, but not arrogant, vulnerable, but only in ways that inspire admiration. You didn't learn these rules consciously. Your body learned them. That tightening in your chest when you disappoint someone, that spike of anxiety when you say no, that hollow feeling after success fades faster than it should. These are not personality traits. They are conditioned responses. And this is where the illusion of self-esteem becomes dangerous, because it teaches you to interpret these signals as personal failures. I need more confidence. I need to love myself more. I need to fix my mindset. So you turn inward again. You read, you reflect, you analyze yourself endlessly. But notice what never changes. The pressure remains. The fear remains. The sense that something is always at stake remains. Why? Because self-esteem doesn't free you from judgment. It teaches you to internalize it. You become both the prisoner and the guard. You monitor your thoughts. You regulate your emotions. You punish yourself for not being evolved enough. Even your healing becomes a performance. You start asking questions that seem healthy but are secretly violent. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be better? These questions sound introspective, but they carry an assumption of defect, and that assumption never leaves. So even on your best days, when you feel confident, productive, admired, there's a subtle anxiety humming underneath, because confidence built on conditions knows it can be revoked at any moment. One mistake, one rejection, one failure to meet expectation, and the floor disappears. This is why self-esteem is so fragile. Not because you're broken, but because it is dependent on feedback, on comparison, on context, and dependence always creates fear. Fear of falling, fear of slipping, fear of being revealed as not enough. So you manage yourself carefully. You soften your truth. You over-prepare. You over-give. You overthink. You try to stay ahead of rejection, and over time, something subtle but devastating happens. You lose the ability to feel grounded without external confirmation. Silence feels like failure. Neutrality feels like disapproval. Being unseen feels like non-existence. So you stay visible, productive, helpful, pleasant, even when you're exhausted, even when you're resentful. Even when something inside you is screaming for rest, honesty, or rupture. Because stopping feels dangerous. If you stop performing, who are you? If you stop improving, are you still worthy? If you stop pleasing, will you still be loved? These questions aren't philosophical. They are existential threats, and they reveal the core contradiction at the heart of self-esteem culture. You are told to be yourself, but only if that self remains palatable. You are told to love yourself, but only if that self is improving. You are told you are enough, but surrounded by systems designed to ensure you never feel complete. So you oscillate between confidence and collapse, between self-love and self-criticism, between empowerment and quiet despair. And the cruelest part? You blame yourself for the oscillation. You assume you haven't done enough inner work. You assume you missed some insight. You assume everyone else has figured out how to feel stable inside. They haven't. They're just better at hiding the same fear. Because this fear is structural. It is not healed by affirmations. It is not resolved by self-esteem exercises. It is not cured by confidence. It is produced by a system that asks you to earn your right to exist comfortably. And once you see this, the great question becomes unavoidable. It no longer whispers. It confronts you. What if self-esteem is not the foundation of a healthy life, but the mechanism that keeps you adapting to an unhealthy one? What if the constant effort to feel worthy is the very thing preventing you from feeling free? What if peace doesn't come from thinking better about yourself, but from no longer putting yourself on trial? This is not comforting. It destabilizes everything you've been taught about growth, healing, and success. But it opens a door most people never walk through, because beyond it lies a terrifying possibility, a life where you no longer ask permission to exist as you are. And that question, that possibility, is where the real journey begins. Imagine this. The problem was never that you lacked self-esteem. The problem was that you were taught to need it. This is the part almost no one wants to confront, because it threatens the entire self-help industry, the productivity culture, the modern idea of personal growth. Self-esteem is treated as a universal good, a psychological nutrient like oxygen. Without it, you are told, you will collapse. But psychology, real psychology, not slogans, tells a far more disturbing story. Carl Jung warned that when the ego becomes obsessed with self-image, the psyche fractures. The self splits into what is acceptable and what must be hidden. The more you identify with the good version of yourself, the more power you give to the rejected parts in the shadow. And what is self-esteem, really? It is not self-knowledge. It is not self-acceptance. It is self-evaluation, a constant internal ranking system. How am I doing? How do I compare? Am I enough yet? Notice the structure. There is always a judge. There is always a score. There is always a future version of you that you must reach to feel at peace. This structure did not emerge naturally. It was shaped. Historically, human worth was not psychological. It was relational and existential. You belonged to a tribe, a role, a rhythm of life. You mattered because you existed within a web of meaning. Modernity broke that. When traditional sources of meaning collapsed, religion, community, shared myth, something had to replace them. That replacement was the self. Jean-Paul Sartre called this the unbearable burden of freedom. When nothing externally defines your worth, you must define it yourself. But the human nervous system was never designed to constantly self-legitimize. So we invented metrics: achievement, attractiveness, confidence, happiness. Self-esteem became the currency that proved you deserved your place in the world. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this coming. He described modern humans as trapped between desire and boredom, endlessly striving, never arriving. The self becomes a project that is never finished, and psychology, instead of dismantling this trap, often reinforced it. Early self-esteem research framed it as a buffer against anxiety and depression, and in limited contexts, that was true. But something went wrong when self-esteem stopped being a byproduct of a grounded life and became its goal. Once that happened, worth became conditional, and conditional worth is indistinguishable from control. Think about how early this begins. You are praised not for existing, but for behaving correctly. Loved not for being, but for pleasing. Rewarded when you align, corrected when you deviate. No one says, "Your value depends on this." They don't have to. Your nervous system learns it implicitly. Gabor Mate explains that children will always sacrifice authenticity for attachment. Survival comes first. If being yourself threatens connection, you abandon yourself without hesitation, and self-esteem grows out of this wound. It becomes a compensatory structure. If I become good enough, useful enough, impressive enough, maybe I won't be abandoned. This is why self-esteem feels necessary and exhausting, because it is built on fear, fear of rejection, fear of insignificance, fear of falling back into invisibility. Friedrich Nietzsche saw self-esteem not as strength, but as fragility disguised as pride. When worth depends on evaluation, you are always vulnerable to collapse. True strength, he argued, comes from self-overcoming, not self-admiration. But modern culture flipped this. We teach people to like themselves, not to understand the forces shaping them. So, instead of asking, "Why am I anxious in neutral situations?" you ask, "Why is my confidence low?" Instead of asking, "What system is demanding constant proof of my worth?" you ask, "How can I improve my self-image?" The question itself keeps you trapped, because self-esteem assumes the problem is internal. It individualizes what is structural. Aldous Huxley warned about this kind of control, not through force, but through internalized discipline. When people police themselves, the system no longer needs to. Self-esteem culture teaches you to self-monitor endlessly. Your thoughts, your emotions, your productivity, your likability. You become a project manager of your own existence, and you mistake this hypervigilance for self-awareness. But real awareness is quiet. This is why even high self-esteem individuals often feel unstable, because beneath the positive self-image is the same mechanism: evaluation. Positive or negative doesn't matter. The moment your worth is something you can gain or lose, you are not free. You are regulated. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning cannot be pursued directly, it must be found indirectly, as a consequence of living authentically. The same applies to inner stability. The more you chase self-esteem, the more it slips, because you are reinforcing the belief that something is missing. That belief becomes the background noise of your life. And here is the hidden problem. Finally named, self-esteem trains you to relate to yourself the way systems of power relate to individuals. Through measurement, through optimization, through approval and withdrawal. You are not healing, you are adapting. And adaptation to a distorted environment always produces inner conflict. This is why you feel tired even when you are doing well. Why success doesn't settle your nerves, why praise fades quickly, why rest feels undeserved. Your psyche is trying to tell you something, not that you need more confidence, but that you are living under an invisible demand to justify your existence. And until that demand is questioned, not managed, not improved, not optimized, you will keep mistaking compliance for growth. This section ends where the real danger begins. Because once you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it, and what it reveals about your life, your relationships, your ambitions, your exhaustion, will change how you interpret everything. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that most of your life has been shaped by a silent calculation, not a conscious one, a biological one. Before every decision, before every word you speak, before every boundary you consider setting, something inside you asks, faster than language, will this lower my value? You don't hear the question, but you feel its pressure, in the tightening of your chest before saying no, in the hesitation before expressing anger, in the strange guilt that follows rest, in the anxiety that appears when you are not useful, productive, or admired. This is not personality. This is conditioning. When self-esteem becomes the axis of identity, the nervous system adapts around approval-seeking as a survival strategy. Over time, this strategy stops feeling like a choice and becomes reflex. Neuroscience explains why. The brain is not designed to seek truth. It is designed to seek safety. And in a social species, safety is encoded as acceptance. Every like, compliment, achievement, or sign of validation releases dopamine, not because it feels good, but because it signals belonging. The same chemical that rewards food and sex rewards approval. But here's the trap. Dopamine does not produce satisfaction. It produces seeking. The more you get, the more your brain learns to want. So when your sense of worth is tied to self-esteem, your mind becomes addicted to signals that confirm it. You don't just enjoy praise, you need it to regulate your internal state. This is why silence feels threatening, why neutral reactions feel like rejection, why being unseen hurts more than being criticized. Your brain fills the gap with danger, and slowly, almost invisibly, your behavior changes. You begin to edit yourself before the world can. You become agreeable not because you are kind, but because disagreement risks disapproval. You become high-achieving not because you love the work, but because achievement stabilizes your identity. You become strong not because you are resilient, but because vulnerability might lower your value. Psychology calls this self-concept contingency, when self-worth depends on specific outcomes. Research consistently shows that the more contingent your self-esteem is, the higher your anxiety, depression, and emotional volatility. But culture celebrates this state. We call it ambition. We call it confidence. We call it emotional intelligence. Meanwhile, your inner life grows narrower. Carl Jung described this as a slow alienation from the self. The persona, the social mask, becomes so polished that it replaces the person underneath, and whatever does not fit the image is pushed into the shadow. Anger becomes shame, need becomes weakness, Rest becomes laziness. Desire becomes selfishness. The shadow does not disappear. It leaks. It leaks into passive aggression, into resentment, into burnout, into sudden emotional collapses that seem to come from nowhere. You tell yourself you are tired, but you are not tired of effort. You are tired of performing worth. And the consequences extend beyond the mind. The body keeps score. Chronic people-pleasing correlates with elevated cortisol, weakened immune response, digestive issues, and chronic pain. When the nervous system is stuck in prove-yourself mode, it never fully enters rest. Even relaxation becomes performative. You try to relax correctly, heal efficiently, love without burdening anyone. So rest never lands, and something more subtle happens. Your intuition fades, because intuition requires internal authority. It requires trusting signals that may contradict external approval. But when your worth is externally regulated, your internal compass weakens. You start asking others what you should want. You measure your desires against trends. You doubt your instincts if they don't align with what is praised. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this bad faith, living according to roles rather than responsibility for one's own existence. You are not lying to others. You are lying to yourself, not consciously, but through avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, avoidance of disappointment, avoidance of the discomfort that comes with being fully seen. And this avoidance shapes your relationships. You attract people who benefit from your self-erasure. You stay longer than you should because leaving feels like failure. You confuse being needed with being loved. Love becomes another arena of evaluation. Am I good enough to keep them? Am I too much? Not enough? So you shrink or overextend. Either way, you disappear. This is the unseen consequence few talk about. High self-esteem cultures produce low self-trust individuals. People who look confident but feel hollow, capable but disconnected, admired but unseen. And society runs smoothly on this, because people who doubt their intrinsic worth are easy to motivate, easy to shame, easy to sell improvement to. They will overwork to prove value, overconsume to signal identity, over-adapt to avoid rejection. They will call it growth. But deep down, something feels wrong. A quiet grief, a sense of living slightly off-center, a suspicion that life is passing by while you manage your image. This is not because you failed at self-esteem. It's because self-esteem was never meant to carry the weight of your existence. And here is the most unsettling consequence of all. The more you try to build self-esteem, the harder it becomes to feel real. Because reality does not grade you. Reality simply happens. The moment you stop evaluating yourself, something unfamiliar appears. Silence, ground, presence. And that silence terrifies the part of you that learned to survive by proving itself. So you rush back to effort, back to identity, back to improvement, not knowing that what you fear losing, status, approval, admiration, was never the thing keeping you alive. This is where the rebellion must begin, but not yet. First, you have to feel the full weight of what has been shaping you, because once you do, the question is no longer, how do I raise my self-esteem? It becomes, imagine this. For the first time in your life, you stop asking whether you are enough. Not because you finally feel enough, but because the question itself collapses. It feels wrong at first, almost irresponsible, like letting go of a steering wheel while the car is still moving. Your mind panics. It scrambles for metrics, feedback, proof. If I don't measure myself, how will I know who I am? If I don't improve, won't I decay? If I stop chasing worth, won't I disappear? This fear is not irrational, it is learned, Because the moment you step out of the self-esteem framework, you are no longer playing by society's most sacred rule. That value must be earned. And that is the rebellion. Not rebellion against others. Rebellion against an internalized economy of worth. Most people think freedom comes from raising self-esteem. It doesn't. It comes from withdrawing belief from the idea that worth is something you can lose. This is the radical shift. You were never meant to feel worthy. You were meant to function without needing the question. Nietzsche hinted at this when he warned against moral systems that turn life into a ledger of merit. The moment you ask, "Am I good enough?" you are already enslaved to an external judge, even if that judge lives in your own head. So the first act of rebellion is not confidence, it is disobedience. Disobedience to the voice that says, "Prove it, fix it, earn it, become better so you can exist more fully." Instead, you practice something deeply counterintuitive. You let discomfort exist without justification. You let awkwardness pass without explanation. You let silence happen without filling it. You let disapproval land without repairing it. At first, your nervous system reacts like you're in danger. Your heart races. Your thoughts spiral. Your mind invents catastrophes. This is withdrawal, not from validation, but from identity dependence. Psychologically, this is known as deconditioning. When a behavior has been reinforced for years, the absence of reinforcement feels like threat. But nothing is actually wrong. You are not losing value, you are losing habituation. This is why historical figures who truly broke free looked disturbing to their contemporaries. Socrates refused to perform respectability. Diogenes rejected social approval entirely. Spinoza lived quietly, unbothered by recognition. Viktor Frankl found meaning even when worth was stripped away. They weren't fearless, they were unhooked. Unhooked from the belief that their inner state needed to match society's expectations. Here is the second shift, and this one feels even more dangerous. You stop using self-improvement as self-rejection. Most people improve because they are subtly disgusted with who they are. Growth becomes an apology for existing as you are now. The rebellion reclaims growth as expression, not correction. You don't change to be worthy. You change because change happens when energy is no longer spent on self-surveillance.
Think of a child absorbed in play. They improve constantly, without self-esteem, without comparison, without evaluation. Mastery emerges from curiosity, not judgment. The adult mind forgot this, so you relearn it. You practice doing things badly without collapsing. You practice saying no without justification. You practice being misunderstood without correcting the narrative. This builds something self-esteem never could: self-trust. Self-trust does not ask, "Do they approve?" It asks, "Is this true for me?" And truth is quieter than approval. Less dramatic, more stable. At first, you won't like it. Approval feels intoxicating. Truth feels flat. But flat is not empty. Flat is grounded. As self-trust grows, a strange power appears. You become harder to manipulate. Shame loses leverage. Guilt stops working automatically. Praise becomes pleasant, but no longer necessary. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you precise. You give where you choose. You care without self-erasure. You help without disappearing. You begin to notice how often the world confuses compliance with goodness. You see how many moral systems are designed to extract labor, silence dissent, and reward self-sacrifice without limits. And instead of fighting them, you step sideways. That is rebellion, not loud, not reactive, but absolute. The final shift in this section is the most liberating and the most unsettling. You allow yourself to be ordinary. No hidden potential narrative. No destiny pressure. No need to matter on a grand scale. Just aliveness. Breathing without performance. Living without symbolic meaning attached to every action. This terrifies the part of you that was raised to believe life must justify itself. But once that terror passes, something unexpected happens. Joy becomes quieter and more frequent. Connection becomes simpler and more real. You stop asking what an experience says about you and start noticing the experience itself. This is not enlightenment. It is return. Return to a mode of being that existed before worth was turned into currency. And now standing here, the question that haunted you for so long has almost disappeared, not answered, dissolved. And in its place, a new question forms, one that cannot be unasked. A question that will not flatter you, motivate you, or reassure you. A question that will end the entire conversation about self-esteem forever. That question is waiting, and it changes everything. Imagine this. You wake up one day and realize the voice in your head, the one that judges, evaluates, ranks, and corrects you, has gone quiet. Not silenced, not defeated, simply irrelevant. It's still there technically, like an old radio playing in another room, but you no longer turn toward it. You no longer organize your life around its noise. And in that quiet, something shocking becomes clear. You were never broken, not once, not as a child, not after the failures, not after the humiliations, not even in your lowest moments. The suffering you called low self-esteem was not evidence of inner deficiency. It was evidence of misidentification. You believed you were the object being evaluated, when in reality, you were the awareness doing the evaluating. This is the final truth. Self-esteem was never the problem. The problem was believing that your value was an object inside the mind, something measurable, adjustable, fragile. But value is not a thing, it is a story. A story invented so early, reinforced so often, that it felt like physics. Carl Jung warned that when the ego confuses itself with the persona, the social mask, life becomes a performance measured by acceptance. And when the performance falters, the self feels threatened. But the self was never on stage. It was in the audience, watching, mistaking the role for the actor. Here is the realization that reframes everything. You do not experience life as a person. You experience life as awareness having a human experience. And awareness does not need worth. It does not need validation. It does not improve. It does not degrade. It simply is. The moment this clicks, not intellectually but existentially, the entire economy of self-esteem collapses. You see why chasing confidence never worked, why affirmations felt hollow, why praise faded quickly, why criticism cut so deeply. Because you were trying to stabilize an identity that was never stable to begin with. The ego is movement, comparison, narrative, defense. It cannot be secured, and it was never meant to be. The deepest freedom comes when you stop asking the ego to provide what only awareness can give. Ground. This does not make life easy. It makes it honest. You still feel fear. You still feel doubt. You still fail, stumble, hesitate. But none of it threatens your existence anymore. Failure becomes feedback, not a verdict. Rejection becomes information, not annihilation. Ordinariness becomes peaceful, not humiliating. And here is the most uncomfortable insight of all. Most people don't actually want this freedom because the self-esteem struggle provides something seductive, meaning through suffering. As long as you believe you are working on yourself, you never have to face the terrifying simplicity of being alive without a project, without a narrative arc, without a redemption storyline, without proof of progress, just presence, just breath, just this moment, without explanation. Jean-Paul Sartre said we are condemned to be free, and this is what he meant. Freedom is not empowerment. Freedom is responsibility without justification. You choose how to live, not to earn worth, but because choice is inevitable. And once you see this, a quiet shift happens in how you move through the world. You stop trying to be impressive. You stop trying to be harmless. You stop trying to be exceptional. You start being accurate. Accurate to your limits. Accurate to your desires. Accurate to your truth, even when it costs you approval. This is not selfishness. It is alignment. And alignment does something self-esteem never could. It makes life feel coherent. Not perfect, not happy all the time, but internally consistent. You are no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be. The war ends, and in that ending, something almost poetic emerges. Compassion for yourself and others deepens naturally. Not because you force it, but because when you stop defending an identity, you can finally see other humans clearly, not as threats, not as judges, not as mirrors of your worth, just as other nervous systems trying to survive meaning. This is why the ultimate truth is so quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't promise transformation. It doesn't sell hope. It simply reveals what was always there, obscured by noise. You were never meant to love yourself. You were never meant to fix yourself. You were never meant to become enough. You were meant to wake up from the question, and once you do, life does not become extraordinary. It becomes real.